How the US dollar became the world's most powerful weapon. Look, I'll be straight with you, no currency in human history has ever been weaponized quite like the American dollar. We're talking about a system so powerful that Washington can bring entire nations to their knees without firing a single shot, without launching a single missile, just by controlling the flow of green paper with dead presidents on it. Think about that for a second. Russia, one of the world's largest economies, got cut off from half its reserves. We're talking $300 billion, literally overnight. Iran's economy shrunk by 20%, not because of bombs, but because they got kicked out of a banking network. Venezuela, sitting on the world's largest oil reserves, can't even sell its own oil. This isn't science fiction. This is happening right now. But here's what most people don't get. This didn't happen by accident. This is the result of decades of strategic planning, historical opportunities, and yeah, sometimes ruthless power plays that would make Machiavelli proud. It all started in 1944. In a small New Hampshire town called Bretton Woods, 44 countries sent their representatives there while World War II was still raging. I doubt any of them realized they were building a system that would give the United States more power than any empire in history. More power than Rome with its legions. More power than Britain with its navy. So how did we get here? How did pieces of paper become more powerful than aircraft carriers? Buckle up, because this story goes deep. Bretton Woods, where it all began to lie in 1944. The war's not even over yet, but the smart money knows the Allies are winning. Representatives from 44 nations gather at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods to figure that's what the hell the global economy is going to look like. After all this is over, you had two main plans on the table. The British economist John Maynard Keynes pitched this idea called Bancor, basically an international currency that wouldn't give any single country too much power. Sounds fair, right? But then you had the American plan, pushed by Harry Dexter White. And guess which one won? Here's the thing. It wasn't really a fair fight. By 1944, the United States owned about 70% of the world's gold reserves. Everyone else was broke, bombed out, exhausted. America was the only major economy still standing. So White's plan won, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. Peg the dollar to gold at $35 an ounce. Then peg every other currency to the dollar. Boom. Just like that. The dollar became the center of the global economy. Other countries could exchange their dollars for gold. That was the promise. But here's what really happened. The whole world started trading in dollars. Central banks started hoarding dollars, and the US could basically print as much money as it needed. It's like being the only guy in town who can write IOUs that everyone accepts. Except these IOUs became more valuable than the actual gold they were supposedly backed by. The Nixon shock. Breaking free. Fast forward to the late 1960s, the system's cracking. The Vietnam War is costing a fortune. We're burning through cash like there's no tomorrow. And France, specifically President Charles de Gaulle, starts getting suspicious. He literally sends ships to America to convert dollars into gold. He's not the only one. The gold is flying out of Fort Knox. By 1971, it's obvious the math doesn't work anymore. There are way more dollars in circulation than America has gold to back them up. So on August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon goes on TV and drops a bomb. We're done converting dollars to gold. Just done. Economists call this the Nixon shock, and everybody predicted it would be a disaster. I mean, the dollar was supposed to be backed by gold, right? That was the whole point. Without gold backing it, why would anyone trust it? But here's the crazy part. It made the dollar more powerful. Why? Because now the US wasn't constrained by how much gold it had. It could print dollars based on the full faith and credit of the US economy, and as long as the world kept using dollars, America could keep the system running. Of course, there was one small problem. The dollar needed something to back it up, some reason for countries to keep using it, and that's where oil comes in. The petrodollar, black gold, green power. The Arab-Israeli war happens, oil prices quadruple, and the global economy goes into shock. But American strategists saw an opportunity in the chaos. Between 1974 and 1975. The US cuts a deal with Saudi Arabia, and this deal, more than anything else, is what made the dollar Here's what went down. Saudi Arabia agrees to sell all its oil, all of it, only in dollars. In exchange, America provides military protection and weapons. Sweet deal, right? Then the other OPEC countries follow suit. Suddenly, if you want oil and every country needs oil, you need dollars. It doesn't matter if you're Japan, Germany, China, or India. You need energy, which means you need oil, which means you need dollars. This is genius-level strategy. Oil is the lifeblood of modern economies. Cars, planes, factories, heating, everything runs on oil. And now the only way to buy it is with dollars. So every country on Earth has to keep dollar reserves. Every central bank has to buy US Treasury bonds. And here's the kicker. This means the US can run massive budget deficits and the whole world finances it. Try doing that as Turkey or Brazil or any other country. You'll get crushed by interest rates. But America gets to borrow trillions at historically low rates because everyone needs dollars for oil. The IMF and World Bank, enforcers of the system, remember Bretton Woods. They didn't just create a currency system. They also created the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. On paper, these institutions exist to help countries in financial trouble. In reality, they became the enforcers of dollar dominance. Here's how it works. A country gets into financial trouble, maybe a currency crisis, maybe too much debt. They go to the IMF for help, but IMF loans come with strings attached. Massive strings. They call them structural adjustment programs, which is a nice way of saying do exactly what we tell you or you're screwed. Countries have to cut public spending, privatize state assets, open their markets to foreign investment, basically restructure their entire economies. Argentina went through this. Indonesia went through this. Greece went through this. The social cost was enormous. Unemployment, poverty, protests in the streets, and critics have been screaming about this for decades. Joseph Stiglitz, former chief economist at the World Bank, wrote entire books about how the system exploits developing countries. But the thing is, there was no alternative. If you wanted access to global capital markets, you played by the rules. And the rules were written in Washington. SWIFT. The digital guillotine. Most people have never heard of SWIFT. It stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Founded in 1973. Sounds boring, right? Just a technical system for banks to send money to each other across borders, but SWIFT became one of the most powerful weapons in the American arsenal. Even though it's technically a Belgian cooperative, the US has enormous influence over it, and getting cut off from SWIFT is basically economic death. Iran learned this the hard way. In 2012, because of its nuclear program, Iran got kicked out of SWIFT. Suddenly, Iran couldn't sell oil, couldn't conduct international trade, couldn't do anything in the global economy. The economy contracted by 20%, inflation hit 40%, people's life savings evaporated, and not a single bomb was dropped. Then came Russia in 2022 after the Ukraine invasion. Western countries froze over $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, just took it, and they kicked major Russian banks out of SWIFT. This was unprecedented, weaponizing the financial system. Against a major nuclear power. Don't think about what this means. You're a country holding US Treasury bonds as reserves. You thought that was your safety net. But now you know that if Washington doesn't like what you're doing, they can just freeze it all. That's a hell of a weapon. Sanctions. The invisible war. The US has turned economic sanctions into an art form. Cuba's been under sanctions since 1960. North Korea is completely isolated. Venezuela, Syria, Iran, the list goes on. Venezuela is a perfect case study. The country has the world's largest oil reserves, larger than Saudi Arabia. But US sanctions have absolutely crushed the economy. Maduro's government can't sell oil on international markets. Revenue dried up. The economy collapsed into hyperinflation. Millions of Venezuelans fled the country. All of this happened without American troops setting foot in Venezuela. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, this relatively unknown department in the Treasury, has more power than the Pentagon in some ways, because OFAC's decisions can destroy economies. But there's a cost to all this. Every time the US weaponizes the dollar, other countries take note. China sees what happened to Russia and thinks, we've got $1 trillion in US treasuries. What if they freeze ours over Taiwan? Russia and China are building alternative payment systems. BRICS countries are trading in their own currencies. The weapon is powerful, but it's pushing countries to find alternatives. The paradox. Power and vulnerability. Here's the thing about using your currency as a weapon. It's incredibly effective in the short term, but it plants the seeds of your own decline. Every sanction, every freeze of assets, every SWIFT cutoff sends a message to the rest of the world. Your money isn't safe in the dollar system if you cross Washington, and that's making even us allies nervous. Europe got a taste of this during the Iran nuclear deal. The US pulled out unilaterally and threatened European companies with sanctions if they kept doing business with Iran. The EU actually tried to create its own payment system to get around US sanctions. It didn't work, but the intent was clear. Even allies are looking for ways to reduce dependence on the dollar. China's watching all this very carefully. They're stockpiling gold, internationalizing the yuan, building the Belt and Road Initiative partly to create yuan-denominated trade networks. They saw what happened to Russia's reserves and drew their conclusions. The Global South fights back the developing world. What people now call the Global South has suffered the most under this system. IMF debt crises, dollar shortages, sudden capital flight. These are chronic problems for Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and increasingly, these countries are saying enough. BRICS started as just an investment category. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now it's evolving into a serious challenge to dollar hegemony. More countries are joining. They're discussing their own currency, alternative payment systems, mutual credit lines. India's trading with Russia in rupees. China's trading with Brazil in yuan. Saudi Arabia, America's oldest petrodollar partner, is considering selling oil to China in yuan. If that happens widely, it would tear apart the 50-year-old petrodollar system. But let's be real, this won't happen overnight. The dollar still makes up over 60% of global reserves. Most international trade is still denominated in dollars. The depth of U.S. capital markets, the strength of the U.S. military, American technological dominance, these all support the dollar. But the trend is clear. Countries are diversifying away from the dollar, slowly but steadily. The weaponization of the American dollar is one of the greatest geopolitical achievements in modern history. It started in 1944 at Bretton Woods, solidified in 1971 when Nixon cut the gold link, was reinforced by the petrodollar system in the 1970s, and reached its peak in the 21st century with swift and comprehensive sanctions regimes today. The United States can control the world by controlling its own currency. This is more effective than Rome's legions, more powerful than Britain's navy. It's the ultimate expression of smart power, destroying enemies without firing a shot. But history teaches us one thing clearly: no hegemony lasts forever. Rome fell, the British Empire collapsed, and the dollar's dominance won't last forever either. Every time the US uses sanctions, it chips away at the system. Every freeze of assets pushes countries toward alternatives. China's rise, the development of digital currencies, the emergence of a multipolar world, all of these threaten the dollar's monopoly. The critical question is, how much can America use this weapon before it breaks? Each use proves its power but also dulls its edge. Countries are building alternatives because they know they could be next. Iran, Russia, Venezuela, their stories are warnings to everyone else. The next few decades might witness the slow decline of the dollar. Maybe the yuan rises, maybe digital currencies take over, maybe we end up with a multi-currency system, or maybe the US reinvents its dominance through technology and financial innovation. But one thing's certain: the dollar as a weapon isn't just an economic issue. It's about power, control, sovereignty, and this power game will continue to shape 21st century geopolitics. The seed planted at Bretton Woods 80 years ago is still bearing fruit, but, like all fruit, it's destined to rot eventually. The question is when and how. We might be on the eve of a new monetary order, and the transition might not be peaceful, because history teaches us something else. Empires don't give up power voluntarily. There will be a fight for dollar hegemony, maybe not a hot war, but definitely an economic, technological, and geopolitical one. And whoever wins that fight will determine the order of the 21st century. The dollar became a weapon through strategic brilliance and historical circumstance. Whether it remains a weapon depends on whether America can adapt to a changing world, or whether it uses the weapon so much that everyone else finds a way to disarm it.